It was a delivery like any other, or at least that's what I thought at first. My shift was almost over when I received an order to deliver some groceries to a remote building around midnight. I was tired, but I decided to take the delivery, thinking it would be quick. Upon arriving at the apartment, I noticed the building was very quiet, with long, dimly lit hallways. When I rang the doorbell, I waited a long time until I heard heavy footsteps approaching the door. Even then, the customer didn't open it right away. I started to feel uncomfortable, and a strange sensation washed over me as I stood there waiting. Finally, the customer opened the door, but just enough for me to see part of his face. He seemed uneasy and avoided making eye contact, glancing quickly into the hallway, as if checking if anyone was there. The air was tense and he appeared nervous as he hurriedly grabbed the bags without much eye contact. I felt uneasy, but I didn't think much of it, assuming he might just be tired or dealing with a personal issue. I left as quickly as possible, still feeling strange, as if I had escaped from something, but I couldn't identify what it was. On the way back, the discomfort lingered, and I kept wondering what had been so strange about that delivery. I had dealt with eccentric customers before, but this man seemed different. There was something almost threatening about the way he avoided eye contact and hurriedly took the bags. I even mentioned the situation to a coworker who thought I was exaggerating. However, shortly after, I received a notification on my phone. A local news report said that the police had been called to that same building due to a violent incident in one of the apartments. When I opened the news article, my heart raced. The apartment mentioned was the same one where I had just made the delivery. Apparently, there had been a serious fight that ended in an arrest, leaving the residents of the building shaken. That's when I realized I could have been caught in a much worse situation if I had arrived just a few minutes later. The thought that the man had been trying to disguise his nervousness while I was making the delivery left me even more unsettled, and the feeling of having escaped something dangerous lingered in my mind. After reading the news, a wave of relief and fear washed over me. I couldn't stop thinking about all of the what-ifs circling in my mind. What if he had decided to involve me? What if I had noticed something I shouldn't have? Each time I recalled how he grabbed the bag, busy places. His experience made me realize that sometimes danger can be disguised in the most ordinary routine, and staying alert is the only way to protect myself. Now, every time I see news about incidents in commonplace places, I think about how easy it is to underestimate the signals our bodies give us, those small alerts that something is wrong. This story will always serve as a reminder that not every delivery is worth the risk, and that getting out of a situation safely is always the priority. I don't know who that man really was or what he was hiding, but I'm grateful to have gotten out in time and to have learned in a frightening way to never ignore my own instincts. It was a cold, rainy night when I arrived at the train station. I had missed the last train of the day and knew I would have to wait for a while until the next one. While I waited, I decided to sit on one of the benches near the charger since my phone was almost out of battery. That's when a man approached, politely asking if he could borrow my charger. He seemed harmless, and since I was all set for my trip, I agreed and handed over the cable. There was nothing strange about his appearance, and even his voice sounded friendly. As he started charging his phone, I realized he was possessiveness. He then confessed that he knew more about me than I imagined, and that left me in shock. My heart raced, and I knew I needed to get out of that situation. I headed for the station exit, trying to stay calm, but my mind was in turmoil, thinking about how a simple request for a charger had turned into something so threatening. As soon as I left the station, I looked around for help. The rain continued to pour, and the streets were almost deserted, with only a few people hurrying by. I felt he was still following me, so I grabbed my phone and quickly called a friend, trying to disguise my trembling voice. I quickly explained that I needed help and felt threatened. Meanwhile, the man approached again, saying he was just trying to be friendly and had no bad intentions. His words sounded empty, and each time he came closer, the sense of danger only increased. When my friend finally arrived, the man's expression changed. He hesitated for a moment, but then turned and started to walk away, muttering something I couldn't understand. As my friend approached, I explained what had happened, and he looked concerned, asking if I wanted to call the police. The adrenaline was still pumping through my veins, and even after the threat had gone, the fear remained. I decided it was best to leave the station. Always reminding me that my safety should be the number one priority. Here's the translation. In recent days, I noticed that the motion sensor light in my yard was activating every night at the same time. At first, I thought it might be an animal, perhaps a raccoon, that always seemed to roam the area. But as the days went by, the situation began to bother me. It wasn't normal for an animal to approach like that and stay for so long. I decided to install a camera to understand what was happening, hoping to capture some footage of the supposed intruder. With a little patience, I would have a good reason to contact pest control. That night, I left the camera on and went to sleep, eager to see the footage the next day. When I woke up, I could hardly wait to review what had been recorded. The first part of the video didn't show anything unusual, just a cat passing by and some leaves rustling. But as time went on, something strange began to appear in the recordings. At one point, I could see a figure standing just outside the camera's field of view, watching the house. My heart raced. The person was there, standing still, seemingly observing every movement inside my home. What should have been a simple problem was stay alert and hope nothing else would happen. In the days that followed, I kept the camera active, hoping to capture more images of the intruder. Each night, I found myself looking out the window, waiting for him to return, but nothing happened. I felt relieved not to see him again, but the anxiety of knowing he could be out there somewhere, watching, kept me on edge. Every noise at night made my heart race, and I couldn't relax. The routine that once felt peaceful and welcoming had turned into a psychological battleground. Friends and family tried to comfort me, saying it was just a phase, but I knew something was wrong. One night, while reviewing the recordings, I noticed something that had escaped my attention. A small figure at the edge of the video, almost invisible, next to the man. It looked like a child, but I couldn't identify it clearly. My heart sank at the thought that the man's presence might be linked to something darker. I decided that I needed to go back to the police and report my new discovery. With the gravity of the situation increasing, I knew I couldn't leave anything behind. My home, which had always been a refuge, had now turned into a place of constant worry. What could that man's intentions be? The possibility importance of being aware of my surroundings and trusting my instincts, and despite the fear, I developed a new appreciation for the safety of my home. I decided to change my exercise routine and started running at night instead of in the mornings. The idea of running under the streetlights and feeling the cool evening breeze seemed more pleasant than waking up early, plus it had the advantage of avoiding the heat of the day. In the first few days, everything was going well. I felt great, and the tranquility of the night gave me renewed energy. But as the days went by, I began to notice a strange feeling. Whenever I passed through a more isolated part of my route, I had the impression that someone was following me. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking it might just be paranoia. but the feeling persisted and intensified with each run. Then, on a particularly dark night, I noticed a figure some distance behind me. He didn't seem like just an ordinary runner. His pace and the way he moved felt very coordinated, as if he was aware of my routine. This made me uneasy. When I finally reached a more lit section, I looked back and saw the man stop, as if he were watching me. His expression wasn't friendly. There was a subtle anger on his face, and my heart raced. The feeling of being report what was happening. I explained about the man who seemed to be following me and the alert messages I had received. The officers were helpful and advised me to keep my workouts in busy, well-lit areas. They also instructed me to pay attention to my surroundings and to call them immediately if I felt I was being followed. I left the station feeling a bit relieved, but the worry still lingered. I knew I needed to change my habits, but I didn't want that change to take over my life. The following week, I opted to run in a park that always had people around, even at night. My heart raced and adrenaline pumped as I began my run. At the same time, I kept my eyes peeled for any movement around me. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. But as I progressed, a feeling of déjà vu washed over me. I looked back and, to my horror, saw the same figure that had chased me before, at a safe distance but clearly following my path. His gaze was more intense, almost as if he was furious that I hadn't done what he expected. This sent me into a panic, and I knew I had to act quickly to protect myself. I began to quicken my pace, my heart pounding, as I ran toward the park exit. The man didn't seem to rush, but the way he kept his distance serving drinks and chatting with customers. But there was a man who caught my attention. He was sitting in a dark corner, watching my every move. At first, I thought he might just be enjoying the atmosphere of the bar, but as the night wore on and the place began to empty, I felt his gaze growing more intense. It was as if he was waiting for something, and that made me uncomfortable. I tried to ignore him and continue my work, but the feeling of being watched was hard to shake. When the bar finally emptied out, the man got up and approached me. His expression was serious, and I didn't know what to expect. He began to speak, and the first thing that struck me was the amount of detail he seemed to know about me. He mentioned my name and the city where I grew up, and even some experiences from my life that I had never shared with anyone there. I was shocked and unsettled, wondering how he knew so much about me. What should have been a casual conversation quickly turned into an alarming situation. With each word he spoke, my heart raced, and I was increasingly intrigued and frightened by what was happening. Then, in a tone that mixed seriousness with an unsettling intimacy, he revealed that he had a gift for me. I didn't know what to think, but a sense of dread washed over me. He began to pull something from time had separated us. The man remained silent as I examined everything, his expression unchanged, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made me nervous. He finally broke the silence, saying that my friend had always cared about me and wanted me to have these things. I asked what had happened to him, but the man just shook his head, as if it were a story he was unwilling to tell. I felt a mix of gratitude and confusion. Why did this stranger know so much about me and my friend? I looked at him, trying to understand his intentions, but I couldn't decipher his expression. He turned to leave, but before he went, he said something that sent chills down my spine. "He never wanted you to be alone, you know?" With those words, he disappeared into the darkness of the night, and I stood there paralyzed, with the box in my hands, wondering what it all meant. His presence, which had once made me uneasy, now left me with a feeling of alertness, as if something bigger was at stake. The unexpected encounter had reopened wounds I thought were healed, and made me realize that my friend's story was far from resolved. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about my encounter with that mysterious man. It had always been a safe and familiar place, but that night, something felt different. Upon entering, I noticed a man standing in the corner, a stranger I had never seen before. He gave me a friendly smile, and despite a slight discomfort, I decided to ignore the feeling. The elevator began to ascend, and soon he started making small talk about the weather and the calmness of the night. At first, I thought it was just a casual interaction, but I soon realized he began asking personal questions, mentioning details about my life that I had never shared with anyone. I grew increasingly intrigued and a bit scared. He knew about my job, where I usually went for lunch, and even mentioned the name of a friend I hadn't seen in months. The way he spoke with such familiarity made me uneasy. I tried to steer the conversation away, but he seemed determined to keep talking. When the elevator finally stopped at my floor, the man didn't move, remaining there in the corner. My heart began to race as I looked at him, hoping he would finally step out, but he just smiled again and said, "It's nice to finally meet you in person." At that moment, adrenaline surged through me, and I knew something was very wrong. The elevator doors opened, but the feeling of danger was palpable. The man continued to stand there, not moving to exit. What should have been a simple ride to my floor was now turning into an uncomfortable elevator, feeling my heart race. He didn't follow me immediately, but the sensation that he was still watching me stayed with me as I ran to my apartment, not daring to look back. As soon as I got to my apartment, I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. Adrenaline was still pumping through my veins, and the image of the man inside the elevator wouldn't leave my mind. I went to the window and looked outside, hoping to see any sign that he was out there. But the darkness of the building's hallway only made me more anxious. What did he want? Why was he so interested in me? With every passing second, my anxiety increased. I couldn't focus on anything. I kept reliving the scene in the elevator, the smile, and how he said, "It's nice to finally meet you in person." That night, I called a friend and told her everything that happened. She tried to reassure me, saying it could just be a coincidence, but I knew something was wrong. The next morning brought a new sense of vigilance. I was alert to any movement around the building, avoiding going out alone. Even though I had a normal day ahead, the memory of the stranger haunted me, and the thought that he could still be nearby made the situation even more terrifying. I decided I needed to take action, whether that meant talking to the building management or at the very least changing my routine to avoid the elevator for a while. What should have been a simple daily commute had turned into a nightmare that seemed never ending.